Hello and welcome to the SAP HANA Academy. I am Dennis Van Kampen, and in this video tutorial series we will discuss SAP HANA Express Edition. The topic of this video tutorial is configuring XSA for HXE on CAL. Now let me explain this cryptic title a little bit. XSA is the advanced version of HANA XS, the built-in application server that ships with the HANA platform. HXE is just an acronym for HANA Express, and CAL is the SAP Cloud Appliance Library. The way HANA Express is provisioned on CAL, it's not been set up for external access. So for example, if you want to use the SAP Web IDE to connect to the Express instance hosted on CAL, you will need to perform some configuration, and that's where we're going to look at in this video tutorial. Now I've showed in the previous video about Express and CAL how you create an instance and how you connect a terminal session to that instance and how you connect HANA Studio to that instance. So I'll skip those topics. If you're not familiar with them, please watch the other video first. Here I'm looking at my instance page in the Cloud Appliance Library for HANA Express, and we know here we have two IP addresses, a public one, an external IP address, and an internal IP address, and we will need both in this configuration. So let's first do a quick test. If we can connect to our HANA instance, I'll copy the IP address, and then using HTTP IP address, and the port is 8000, which is 80 plus the instance number, which for HANA Express happens to be 00. So we get 8000. And this is the default port for HANA XS. Now this just gives me a static page. XS Engine is up and running. So that gives us a good starting point to continue our configuration. Should you not get this page, make sure no ports are blocked between your client browser and the hosted HANA Express edition. For example, a corporate firewall may block port 8000. And you could also run the HTTP info command to make sure that HANA is up and running, and if it's not, you could do an HTTP stop and an HTTP start. Next, we're going to find out what the external or public fully qualified domain name is, FQDN. For this, we'll use the utility NSLOOKUP. This is a generic networking utility, and I'm using here terminal on my Mac to run it, and on Windows you would use the command prompt and then specify the external or public IP address. And here we see that NSLOOKUP has questioned a DNS server, and the DNS server came up with this name. Now if you used Amazon Web Services before, this will not come as a surprise, because they always have the same format, EC2, and then the IP address with dashes instead of dots, compute1, amazonaws.com. So let's copy our external fully qualified host name and redo our tasks. Now whether you get this page or not will depend on the browser you use. I've switched to Firefox here. On my Mac, both Safari and Chrome switched to HTTPS, and then the port no longer matches. So depending on your use case, you actually might have to set up SSL properly for your HANA Express server, particularly if you're doing anything production related. Okay, so far so good. So how do I connect, for example, to any of the XSA apps? For example, SAP Web IDE. Well, for that, I first need to know the port. So we switch to our command line tool. When everything is set up properly, all you have to do is connect. I'm using here the XS command line tool, and with the shorthand L for log on, I'm connecting as the XSA admin user. And then with the command XS apps, all my apps are listed. And this will give me, for example, the port for Web IDE. But as you can see, the fully qualified external public hostname is not the same one used here, and this will need to fix. When we create an instance in CAL of SAP HANA Express, we'll use a solution, and each instance is a clone of that solution, so each instance has exactly the same hostname. However, each instance will also have a unique public or external hostname, as we've just have seen. So we need to configure access to use that unique hostname and not the internal generic hostname. When we run the hostname command, for example, we get sit HXE HANA Express. But if we ping it, we get a different one, vhcalhxedb.dummy.no domain, and the vhcalhxedb is the same hostname used here. So how does this work? First of all, note that the internal IP is the same as we saw on our cal page, and it is in fact the cal appliance agent that adds all these aliases to this IP, so we get both SIT-HXE as vhcalhxedb. It's not important for our configuration, but just that you know. Now, for those not familiar with the XS command line, if you just run the command XS, it will give you the help screen, all the different parameters that are available. And here we see our login and apps command. Now, when you connect for the very first time, the target API URL has not been set yet, so you need to do that first. You use the XS API command for that. When it's set, it will print out the configuration, and when it's not set, it will prompt you for one. To show you how it works, I will use one of the other aliases. It doesn't really matter. The command is XS API, then https:// and then you can either use one of the aliases for the host name or the internal IP address. That works as well. With a colon and then the port to the access controller, which happens to be 3, instance number 30. The first time you use this, you will get a failed SSL connection error because XS does not know which certificate to use. For this, you use the command option --ca cert and then the full path to the default certificate. And now if we run the XS API command, you can see that the API endpoint has been set to this new configuration. Again, for test and development, this is all fine using default certificates. If you're running anything more seriously, of course, you want to set up SSL properly. And for this, you probably would need some support of your security department. So now we can log on, XS_L, and it will request us for the username. This has been specified when XS Advanced was installed. Default user is XSA admin, and the password again was set at install time. Now if we return to our cal page, there is a getting started guide for HANA Express, and this lists the password appliance for XSA Dev and XSA Shine, but doesn't list the one for XSA admin. So for this, I will be using the SAP HANA Administration Console, HANA Studio. Just expand security users and then double click XSA admin and enter the new password. You might want to select the option not to force any password change on next logon. Otherwise, you'll have to do it again. And remember to do the same thing for XSA Dev and if you want, XSA Shine. So now we can log on. The organization name and the space have been set here as well. The first time you connect, you'll also be prompted for this space because there will be a development space and an SAP space, and we'll be using the SAP space here. Then, as we've seen with the command XS apps, we can list our apps, and now we need to configure XSA to use the external hostname and not the internal hostname. For this, we return to HANA Studio, select your system, open the console, go to the configuration tab, expand accesscontroller.ini, select communication and select add parameter, assigning values to system. Key is default_domain and the value is our fully qualified external hostname. Making changes to any of these parameters in the SAP HANA Administration Console will run some SQL for us in the background, so you could also do this on the command line with the alter system command. Now in theory, all we need to do now is restart the Access controller, reconfigure service here. However, the last time I did this, it returned a couple of errors. So what I'll do instead is just stop and start the HANA database and fast forward the video for you. Now before we can connect, we have to make sure that the SAP HANA platform is fully up and running. For this, you can use the HTTP info command. And the thing to watch for is that all the SAP Java virtual machines are up and running. Here I will just see a short list. So I will use the top command. That's a generic Unix command, similar to the system monitor on Windows. And here we can see that both the HTTP name server and the Java processes are consuming considerable CPU. That's because they are still starting up. So we'll have to wait a little bit until CPU idle is over 90%, and then we know that all the processes have been started, and we can verify that with the HTTP info command and see a full list of all our apps. Then we can switch to a browser and copy and paste the URL. We will be warned that the connection is not secured and that the owner of this website has configured their website improperly, which is correct. We've used a self-signed certificate, which is the default certificate that ships with HANA, and this is insecure, so you should never use this for production. However, for a test or training system, this might be okay, so just add an exception, get the certificate, and confirm it. And this will load the HANA Access Advanced logon page for us. The XSA admin user does not have access to Web IDE, so I will be using XSA dev. With the password we just reset in HANA Studio. And then the SAP Web IDE for SAP HANA will be loaded. You will get some tips and tricks at startup, but if you're familiar with it, you can select not to show this and close. So here we are connected to our HANA Express instance running in Cal with SAP Web IDE for SAP HANA. Okay, so much for configuring Access Advanced for HANA Express Edition on Cal. You can find more video tutorials on our YouTube channel, SAP HANA Academy, so please subscribe. If you like this video, give it a thumb up, and if you want, you can connect with us on LinkedIn or follow us on Twitter or like us on Facebook. Thank you for watching.